very much. I'm Ruth Gates. I'm from the University of Hawaii, and I'm a coral reef scientist. I am also the PI of the Coral Reef Earth Cube RCN and a primary investigator on the Coral Reef LTER in Moorea. And so I am very familiar with some of the data challenges that we have in our field. But first of all, I'd like to boast about my work location, which is phenomenal, up in the top left-hand corner. And I'd like to also reiterate that corals are actually living. And some people think they're rocks, but they're not. They've been on the planet for 200 million years, and they have had a symbiosis or used the biology of a small plant for over 50 million years. And this is an amazing evolutionary innovation, which is why they're enormous carbon sinks and extremely important. Corals are incredibly variable. The reefs themselves are never the same in two locations. In the Caribbean, there are 30 species on the reef. In the Great Barrier Reef, there are 400 species on the reef. This is a huge heterogeneity in the system, and no species behaves the same. And that reflects the fact that they use other organisms to their advantage, and they can basically tailor those associations to perform best in a given context. So they're threatened by many, many, many stressors, and this is important because they're sentinel for climate change impacts, and coral reefs are extraordinarily economically important to tropical areas. So they protect the land masses behind them, they basically break storm energies, they are the habitat for coastal fisheries, 70% of the protein in the Pacific comes from the reef, and of course platforms for tourism. These are very, very complex interacting stress profiles. And so you can imagine that studying these reefs, we cross all scales of data. We have many grand challenge questions, but because they're so threatened, many of those questions relate to whether or not corals can persist under the threat of climate change and the growing pressure from human development and human use. And so we are really, poised with the types of data collections that we have and the enormous cyber infrastructure available to ask some very profound questions about how reefs will deal with how resilient they are in the face of climate change and human pressures, and what the role of biodiversity is in these systems. Why are they so heterogeneous over space? Our data types, we have all kinds of data types. So these data layers have been discussed in a number of projects. So from GIS, remote sensing, we have all kind of wave and environmental context data. But many of the areas that are sort of emerging are these really high-resolution molecular techniques. We'll take a given individual, and we will essentially go from the transcriptome all the way up to the phenotype, and we'll try to integrate those data sets. And in fact, that's where my lab is focused. But one of the really I think huge opportunities and unique attributes of our field is just the incredible plethora of image data that we have across all different scales of biology that we work. And most of these data have been analyzed almost primarily for qualitative support. There's much in the literature, but I would posit that we have some extraordinary time series data in these images that can be culled, and also there are many opportunities with ongoing projects. We do things like this. We'll look at the same coral over time, and this is actually a very high resolution time series for corals. The same colony died in essentially 6 weeks. That is actually a little bit of a problem, given that we think the corals are everlasting organisms. But actually, I think they're very ephemeral, and they turn over very rapidly. But there's one collection that I think is extraordinarily compelling and exciting, and it comes from a sort of a stochastic meeting with a member of the community who's a daily swimmer in Hawaii. And these daily swimmers train for triathlons, and they swim in the same locations every day and have been doing that for 50 years. They're doctors, they're lawyers, and they all have digital cameras. And they've been photographing these same sites for the last 50 years. Now, I'm working with 10 of these individuals who swim around the island of Oahu, and we are now contacting people who are throughout the 8 inhabited Hawaiian islands. I'm starting to work with people in Moorea. those 10 individuals have collections well over 100,000 images. One individual has 75,000 images on a hard disk. Now, can BrownDog help us to start to analyze these data, to look for features within these collections taken at the same location over time that are persistent, that allow us to re-identify sites, cluster the images, so that we can start to analyze how coral size has changed over time, how many individuals coral cover, the relative abundance of different species. I think it's an extraordinary opportunity, and so I'm very, very excited to work in the sort of the mini hui, or the little group that seems to be forming, who are all about the images that we have and the very large data sets for imaging. So I'm extremely excited to see this parallel effort emerging. So thank you very much.